Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg. Compulsive gambling is not new, but the availability of legal gambling seems to be everywhere. From states allowing new casinos, and they need to bring in that badly needed revenue, to the proliferation of Native American-run casinos. How has this affected the pervasiveness of gambling addiction? How big a problem is this in America? Is it really an addiction, and if so, what protocols can really help with this problem? With me today is Keith Whyte. He has for the past 14 years been the director of the National Council on Problem Gambling. And before that, he was the director of research of the American Gaming Association. Keith, thanks a lot for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dick.
Keith, I think I know what you're going to say, but is gambling a true addiction when people do get addicted to gambling? Is it really an addiction or just a problem?
It is, and we were gratified that the American Psychiatric Association recently reclassified it as the first of the behavioral addictions. So while they didn't change the criteria very much, they moved it into a new category, which right now only has indeed one disorder. It's gambling disorders, the first of the non-substance related disorders, the addiction, if you will, in the DSM-5. So we've known it for a long time. We know phenomenologically and from a lot of other ways you look at it, it mirrors in many ways traditional or classic addictions. And the emerging science helped even the DSM committee place it in a way that I think a lot more people are going to recognize it as an addiction. For
those who don't know, the DSM to be 5 is what clinicians have to use with insurance companies and categorize what is the illness they're treating. What other behavioral addictions were in there besides gambling addiction?
Gambling is it for the moment.
Okay.
It's the disorder that had the most robust evidence, and we can certainly talk about some of the studies and what they looked at to place it in this category. They've considered things like sex and overeating, but in this version of the manual, gambling disorder is the only one. Is the first. Mm-hmm.
How is it similar and how is it different from alcohol and drug addiction?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's remarkably similar. It's characterized by preoccupation, by tolerance, by loss of control. It's something that many people can use recreationally, whether it's alcohol or gambling, but that for some it starts to, you start to develop chasing. It starts to negatively impact your life, and not just yours, but your family, friends, coworkers. So while the difference is there's no external substance, as there is with drugs or alcohol, we know remarkably that the changes in the brain, the same neural pathways, are active and implicated in gambling addiction just as they are with drugs or alcohol. So, for example, to put it in layperson's terms, if you look at the brain of a pathological gambler and the brain of a cocaine addict, those two brain patterns share the same exact patterns of activity, the same changes, some areas that are deadened, some areas that are activated. And so functionally, if you will, the brain of a pathological gambler is indistinguishable from the brain of a cocaine addict. And that shows that those deeper biological underpinnings of addiction.
You mentioned tolerance. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's interesting. If a problem gambler could bet that just $5, and not develop tolerance, then they perhaps wouldn't get into such enormous financial trouble. But much like alcoholics, for example, you need to bet or drink more and more to achieve that same high. Because again, we know that neurochemically now, the pleasure receptors get deadened to anything but and more gambling. And so literally, what was what was exciting at $5, now you've got to bet 500 or 5,000 or 50,000. Yeah, and I think one of the big differences, to go back to the differences between gambling addiction and drug and alcohol addiction, is that our body has not evolved any formal defenses yet. Over thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, we've evolved defenses against alcohol. If you drink too much, you throw up or you pass out. But there's not enough money in the world to overdose a problem gambler. So that $50,000 bet can be $500,000, can be $5 million. It's almost limitless because you obviously can gamble on credit as well. You can't get high on credit. Or you can't get high without having the drug there.
Yeah.
But you can gamble certainly without having the money.
Is time also involved here? You're saying you got to bet more. Do you have to spend more time to get satisfied?
It really seems to be. People with gambling problems obviously spend significantly more time than even heavy recreational gamblers, who spend a lot more time than just casual gamblers. And so that preoccupation is certainly a factor, as is the fact that, and this is another important salient difference, problem gamblers may believe they're only one bet away from winning everything back. So it encourages sometimes extraordinary persistence. And again, an alcoholic doesn't think that, if I drank a case of beer last night, if I can just double or nothing, if I can drink 2 cases of beer tonight, I'll be better. But the problem gambler, especially the one who sees their disorder as mainly a financial issue, if they're already $50,000 in the hole, and their brain is urging them to keep gambling, that crazy logic may lead them to think, well, if I can just put another $50,000 on the line, win everything back, and then if they lose, then they're $100,000. But they can push themselves through to keep going, because for most people, when you start to lose more than twice your average annual income, which is the average gambling debt upon admission to treatment. So if you've lost in the current year twice your average annual income, you may feel like that's your only way out, is to gamble more.
So it sounds like whoever becomes a addicted gambler is headed to financial ruin unless they get help.
Yeah, finances are certainly one of the easiest and most, in some ways visible signs of a gambling addiction. We think it goes much deeper, and that for most of our folks, the most important dramatic consequences are the psychological, if you will, and even the physical impacts on health. So problem gamblers obviously have high rates of depression, other substance abuse, a wide variety of mental health issues that are both cause and effect. These things are very, very deeply intertwined and tangled, but they also have enormously high rates of physical problems. Many of them related to the stress and the anger, the anxiety of being trapped in a gambling addiction.
In the movies, people get in trouble like this have a call from their bookie who's going to break their arms. Does that happen to these people?
It can. I mean, we should certainly never understate the danger of, if you're gambling illegally, it's obviously associated with gambling addiction, and it's also associated with a host of negative consequences. But because this is seen as a victimless crime, police departments will tell you, quite frankly, that they've got many other problems that they think are more important. It rarely rises to the level of actual physical violence. It can happen, but more often that's more of a Hollywood phenomenon, or it's something that's threatened. But this is such a lucrative business for most bookies that the last thing they want to do is really draw the attention of the police by physically hurting somebody, because that will bring in law enforcement.
How do people get so deeply in debt? I mean, who allows them to have the debt besides a bookie?
Well, certainly the use of credit is growing and rising, and as cash becomes ever more digital, ever more ephemeral, it's much easier to convert that into current credits and chips, and even digital chips. So we know that now a lot of people don't use cash. So they may, much as they do other consumer purchases, they may start to put their gambling on their ATM and debit and credit cards. And there's a variety of ways to do this, either with legal sites or increasingly with illegal sites on the internet, which really facilitates a lot of risky gambling.
Do you mean these gamblers use someone else's credit card to get their money?
Well, their own credit card, and when they start to get into a gambling addiction, that's when they do start to use someone else's credit card. And even if it starts out very sincere, I'm in a hole, I need to make the mortgage payment, I'm only going to borrow this money as soon as I win, and I know I'm going to win because I've gambled extensively, and it's just a bad beat. I'm always getting one step away from winning. I'm going to pay that back, and you know what? I'm going to pay it back with interest. Well, we know that when the odds are against you, the longer you gamble, the more likely you are to lose.
Sure. But I don't understand something, Keith.
Yeah.
How are they getting this money illegally? And how do they get the credit of other people?
Well, I mean, just as we've seen with drugs, there are manyfold ways where you can finance activities that are legal or illegal or quasi-legal. So, we know that recreational gamblers right now that choose to gamble illegally either pay their bookies in cash, or they go offshore and find a wide variety of electronic payment means to circumvent U.S. law to be able to move money from the U.S. to a online account and from there to online gambling.
But they have to have the money to move it, right?
Well, yeah, and we know that if you're a problem gambler, roughly 70% of Gamblers Anonymous members report committing a white-collar crime to finance their gambling.
My goodness. Wow. How many people, right now, would you say qualify as gambling addicts?
In the United States, it's about 6 to 8 million adults.
What?
And about 500,000 or 500,000 adolescents.
That causes pause. That's a huge number. It's a huge
number.
Yeah,
it's between 2 to 3% of the adult population, which is roughly comparable to people with serious drug abuse problems, and certainly less than alcohol and tobacco. But it's a much bigger number than people would believe.
And is this true in communities without casinos just as readily as those in Las Vegas or New Jersey?
Yeah, one of the interesting things of this is as gambling has spread, there's been this massive natural experiment across the United States over the past 30 years. It really, does proximity to high-stakes, high-speed gambling increase the rate of addiction? And the answer is yes, but it may be sort of a exposure effect, and that decreases over time, because the overall rate, national rate, still seems to be about that 2 to 3%. However, I think one of the more important calculations is if you bring high-speed, high-stakes gambling to your town, whether or not the absolute rate of problem gamblers is going to rise is an important question. But what about the severity of the addiction? Because I think that's where we would argue the impact is more profound. So let's say you were a gambling addict, but you're playing mainly in a small stakes poker game and this and that. And you're traveling to Vegas when you can, once a month or once a week. When the casino moves just down the street, you may have already been a gambling addict. You may have already, your life is sort of spinning out, but now it can really spin out of control. Now you can be at the casino every day. The limits are much higher. You've got much more exposure. So I think it's probably the severity of addiction that's more impacted by the expansion of gambling rather than the rate of problems.
What is the progression of this like? Do most people, if they start gambling, just fall right down that hole quickly, or does it take a long time?
No, it takes a long time, and this is where one of the biggest, most important gender differences is seen. For almost everybody, because we're a nation of gamblers, Americans are risk takers and entrepreneurs. Many of us learned gambling with the knee of our grandparents, and playing pinochle and things like that. So for most people, for most active gamblers, which is 75% of adults, have placed at least one bet in the past year. There's the winning phase. And then there's the losing phase, and for most people, that's it. You win some, you lose some. You moderate your activity. For problem gamblers, there's the winning phase, the losing phase, and then the desperation phase, and that's where they start to chase losses, develop tolerance. All the negative consequences.
Go over that a little more, would you? The winning phase and the losing phase. How does that progress?
Well, I think for most people, when gambling is social, you do experience some wins, and even sometimes some larger wins. We know that one of the biggest predictive factors for developing a gambling addiction is an early, unexpected big win. So if one of your first gambling experience is hitting that jackpot, even if you're a kid, a $500 lottery ticket, when you're 10 years old, your parents are hooping and hollering, and that's going to be this big, that can lead to a lifetime of chasing that same high, because it's the action, it's the feeling of being in action that problem gamblers report being the most addictive. The money, that's just what they use to keep playing the game. So the substance that problem gamblers abuse may be money, but the high The thing that really keeps them coming back is that action. That's the high that's comparable to the high of a cocaine addict.
Is that win or lose the action, just being in the action, or is it the hope of winning?
Indeed. Problem gamblers will tell you that the only thing that's better than winning is losing, because that means you've got to get another bet down.
Wow.
And
So
if
the
you
whole
have the
process
opportunity
is
to
the
bet
process.
again. Yeah, it is a process of behavioral addiction, very much so.
So if we take a snapshot of compulsive gamblers, what does that snapshot look like in terms of age, sex, etc.?
Traditionally, it was a 40-ish-year-old white male who was a sports bettor, and who preferred mainly strategic games, games like blackjack or racing or poker, where there's your skill has an impact on the outcome. It's a lot smaller than most people think, but so what we're seeing now is you're just as likely now to be a slightly older, more likely to be African American woman who prefers slots or other non-strategic games. So the males tended to be action gamblers. What they got out of gambling was a sense of narcissism, entitlement, being in action, being that big shot. What we see a lot with female problem gamblers is just the reverse. They want to be able to sit in front of that machine for 12 hours a day, not have anybody bother them, escape from stress, depression, all the all the difficulties of life. And gambling can work both ways. It's a lot like alcohol. It's in how
you theorize
you use it.
The reason it's African American women is they just have more problems. It's tougher.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think gambling, now that it's become much more accessible and much more socially acceptable, and those two things go hand in hand, of course. As it's spread out, it's no longer unusual to see a woman alone in a casino. 30, 40 years ago in Vegas, that was the slot machines were sort of created for something for the women to do, but it wasn't. Women didn't go to Vegas to gamble. Now that you've got parlors, video lottery terminal, parlors and bars and taverns throughout your city, it's a lot easier to go and just drift away for a couple hours, to get out of your head for a little bit.
Yes. So you mentioned lotteries. That doesn't sound like action to me. Can that be addictive?
Nowadays it can. Traditional lottery draws, what we grew up thinking of the traditional lottery are tickets that it may be drawn once a day, once a week even. The Irish sweepstakes was once a year. That has been not replaced, but they've added to the product mix both scratch tickets, which are instant, and things like video lottery terminals, which mimic the look and feel and action of a slot machine, and in many cases are literally made by the same companies. They're just called video lottery terminals to get around some prohibitions on slots. So you can have high-speed, high-stakes, very fast action with these games. They can also be played slowly to encourage by people who are looking for that escape. And interestingly enough, the price point of lotteries is going up. So traditionally, a lottery ticket might be 50 cents or $1. Now, what you have in most states is a $20 and even $50 tickets, and probably within a few years, we'll have a $100 ticket. And obviously, on jackpot games like Mega Millions, you can spend hundreds or even thousands. While in the casino side, the price point is going just the opposite way. So the most profitable and the most prominent machines on the casino floor now are penny slots. And what else can you buy in this day and age for a penny?
Why are they
the lottery says it's $1 in a dream. The casino says, well, it's a penny in a dream.
Yeah. Why are they profitable?
Well, because no one actually plays a penny. In fact, you can't actually physically insert a penny into a lot of these machines. You've got to insert either your card, your ticket in, ticket out card, or your a dollar bill. And the odds, if you do put in a penny, if you're playing 1 penny or 1 credit, you're only going to win 1 penny or 1 credit. So when you play maximum coins, and in a lot of these machines it's $2 or $3 or $5, you wind up spending, ironically, a lot more than you would if you were playing some of the other machines.
Who is really the most vulnerable amongst these subgroups? Is there any psychological triggers, certain types of issues people have that lend themselves to this addiction?
Absolutely. There's a number, and we can break it down into several broad categories. But things like, again, the impact of genetics and biology. If you have an adult or a close relation who is a problem gambler, or or someone with another serious addiction, you're between 8 to 10 times more likely to develop a gambling addiction yourself. So we know that from twin studies of Vietnam-era vets and from a lot of the neurobiological research, we know there's a strong, that plays probably a pretty significant role in the risk.
These are separated twins, I take it.
Pardon me?
The twin studies are based on twins that were separated at birth or something?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's other sort of genetic and neurobiological research.
Okay.
There's also a lot of psychological research that shows that people of low socioeconomic status, people that have other addictions, people that are have suffered a major grief or loss event, and here we're thinking a lot about seniors. That what was once recreational gambling can then turn into that escape or that crutch. So they're very much at risk. Other interesting groups, just offhand, real quickly, are military and veterans have demonstrably higher rates of addiction. Athletes, some of the other smaller samples have been found people of racial or ethnic minorities, especially Asian, and people that are in fraternities and sororities. So there's some interesting kind of funny correlations out there, but it is pretty broad. Although there are some factors that may elevate your risk. Being male, certainly gender is one of the strongest. One of the strongest.
Fraternities and sororities. Why would that? What would be the causal issue?
No, so we don't know. I mean, the theory has been that they tend to be more risk taking. They tend to do lots of other. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, if you will.
Before we go a little further into what you do and the protocols to help people, why don't you tell us a little about your organization?
Sure. The National Council on Problem Gambling is the national advocate for programs and services for problem gamblers and their families. And what that means is really we're the spokesperson, if you will, for that 6 to 8 million million strong group out there that feels so much shame and stigma. This is not really understood as an addiction as other things like drugs and alcohol are. It often carries religious or moral overtones. People say, well, we understand why you wouldn't just stop using heroin because it changes the brain, but gambling, there's no substance there. You're not addicted to anything. You're just greedy. You're just rich. You shouldn't have been gambling in the first place. So there's a lot of barriers that we try to help these folks overcome, and many people still seek help through Gamblers Anonymous. And as a principle of these 12-step groups, they have to maintain anonymity. They can't speak for anyone else, and so they need a group like ours to help speak for them.
I mean, if you could get all your goals achieved, what would be the most important goals?
Well, some of the most important goals are just making sure that problem gamblers and their families have services. And we would define that as a comprehensive safety net with prevention, education, treatment, enforcement, and research. And we know today that the total public and private spending on such problem gambling services in the entire United States was just under $60 million last year, compared to the $100 billion in gambling revenue, or the estimated $6 billion in social costs. So we still have a long way to go before we have an adequate or comprehensive safety net available to help minimize the harm while our government and everyone else tries to maximize the benefit.
Why don't we move on to protocols? So someone is a gambling addict, they hit bottom, usually they have debts of twice their annual income. What causes them to start getting help? Is that the issue?
In many cases, the finances are the precipitating problem. They simply, they've been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. They're behind on their rent, their mortgage. They're in some extreme cases, they've lost their house, they've lost their job. They're losing their family, and so they see it as the finances kind of send them in the door. We obviously believe strongly that there needs to be a character change, that there are much deeper issues. But, and one of the interesting things about this is when you look at recovery, and you look at the way people perceive of recovery, again, with the substance abuse, it's like, okay, well, he's off alcohol now. I know he made some bad choices, but it doesn't impair his ability to be a salesperson or to be a trusted associate. With the gambler, especially if there were financial crimes involved, it may dramatically affect their ability to work, ever again.
Mm-hmm.
With felony convictions for embezzlement and fraud,
Sure.
that's really difficult to seek and achieve, good employment back in your field
Mm-hmm.
when you've got this criminal history, which is often not associated with other addictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is it like the 12-step program, like same kind of treatment?
Yeah, so there are 12-step programs which work great for those people that they work for. I mean, I know that's sort of a circular reasoning, but there is also a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy delivered by trained counselors,
Mm-hmm.
and we think they work best in conjunction with each other. Cognitive behavioral therapy to help you understand why you gambled, make some of those changes in character and lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
and then Gamblers Anonymous to further support that and reinforce what for some people can be a lifelong struggle to maintain recovery.
With alcohol, I think it's very easy to see why people could keep going on even with intervention. But with this, how can they keep going on if they're so deeply in debt? Where do they get any money to keep gambling?
Well, you're often there are lots of people that are willing to loan you money. They may not believe the rub is that they may not believe it's for gambling. I need my house is being foreclosed on, or my for kids it's my textbooks got lost or stolen again, or gamblers will often find very creative ways to finance their gambling. And it may be all sorts of loans, done on credit cards. So there are myriad ways to get money with which to gamble.
I suspect there are people who will listen to this who have a friend or a spouse who they think is a compulsive gambler. What should they do?
The best thing you can do is let them know that you care in a non-judgmental, non-confrontational way, and that there is hope and help available. And, if they're willing to access resources, the easiest thing to do, the one-stop shopping, is to call our national helpline at 800-522-4700.
Do that again, would you please?
Sure. We had 311,000 calls last year to the national helpline on problem gambling, which is 800-522-4700. And what you're going to get there is help available in your area. About 70% of our callers are problem gamblers, and about 30% are their family members and loved ones. And the people on that line can direct you to the resources in your state. So it works across the nation. It's 24/7. It's absolutely confidential. And you'll be referred to what resources are available in your state. Now, it may vary widely what's available, but there is hope and help out there.
Is there always a Gamblers Anonymous chapter wherever you go?
Yeah, in most states there are, and it's going to really depend on the region that you're in. There are some states with very active and frequent meetings. There are others where the meetings are sporadic, and we know that Gamblers Anonymous is considerably smaller than some of the other fellowships like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, we always like to tell people if you could drive 3 hours to the casino or the racetrack, you can drive 3 hours to a meeting. But again, that's another one of those barriers to recovery, and one of the things that does make it make gambling addiction a little bit harder to deal with at times than other addictions is the lack of services. That $60 million in total spending on problem gambling doesn't go very far for a population of over 300 million.
If someone does decide they want help, what are the odds of recovery?
Very good. And it's, some people say, it's the best bet you can make. Bet on yourself. We tend not to use that terminology for obvious reasons, but we know that people that complete a program of professional treatment, roughly 70% have either ceased their gambling completely or greatly reduced it, and people that stick with Gamblers Anonymous, at least 50%. Have either abstained or significantly reduced their gambling.
That's pretty positive. That's a much higher
very
rate, isn't
positive.
it, than most other addictions rate?
Well, it compares, and it compares to things like maintenance of a diabetes regimen. So I think there's a lot of hope and help out there. It is treatable. Just a lot of folks don't know that what they have is a disorder. They don't know where to go for help, and it can be difficult for them to access that help even when they do reach out.
Well, Keith Whyte, I think you've given us an awful lot of good information here and helped us understand this issue. And for those listening, if you'd like to hear more of these podcasts, simply go to dickgoldbergradio.com, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.